Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm excited to talk to you today about the subtle art of asking for things. So, real quick, I just want to start off by saying, hi. How many times have you received a DM like this? I know for me, I probably get a decent amount of them each week. I won't go into specific numbers, but it's pretty high. It's some form, actually, that's funny, high and high. It's some form of hi. Hey, how's it going? How are you? Or even sometimes it'll be like, hey, I have a question I would like to ask you. And that's honestly a little bit better because at least they're leading me into what it is that they would like to engage with me about. Because when we're asking for things, it's essentially what we're doing. We're starting an engagement. And so another question I'd actually ask is, better yet, have you ever sent one like this? Have you ever wanted to ask somebody for something and you led off just by greeting yourself by saying, hey, how's it going? It's not inherently bad to do that, to greet, but a lot of times, especially the further away we are from a connection, a long-term relationship with this person, the less effect a greeting, a standalone greeting, is going to have when it comes to fostering some sort of engagement. Incidentally, like 5 million hi messages are sent daily on Twitter. If you see there's a little asterisk. I actually have no idea if that's true, but by the amount I get and other folks get, and there's 330 million Twitter users, I find it hard to believe that this number is probably low. Plenty of times people want to start a conversation, a collaboration, an engagement with somebody. And most times, like, it's never out of ill intention, right? It could be out of nervousness, not sure how to approach the situation, thinking a greeting is better than diving in and asking. And all of these are true, but I think what is lacking from hi is something that we value a lot, which is context. Context is honestly, it's everything. It's one of the most important things that we can have available to us, right? When we make decisions, which is when we're asking somebody something, that's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, I want you to make a decision about this. The more context we provide, the easier it will be. I want to take a quick second and pause right there. I got an awesome introduction, so thank y'all for that. But I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into who I am, why we're here, and why I'm giving this talk. Hey, I'm Kemple, again, founder and principal advisor at Forthright. I'm also the worst dev on Twitter. So you can find me there. Actually, it's probably the easiest place to engage with me. I am a multidisciplinary tech leader, engineer, teacher. I've worn many hats throughout my career over the last little over a decade in tech. I'm also the creator of Developer Advocates Guide series, DX Audits, and the Developer Advocacy Value Cycle. The reason I mention a lot of these things is because a lot of the work that I've done over the last 4 or 5 years has been in the business of asking folks for things. I've been working in developer relations, and as is implied by the title relations, there was a large socio aspect to the job. I was constantly collaborating with people, both in the community as well as internally at the company. I even do this today through my consulting work with Forthright. All of this to say is that after years and years of asking people if they'd like to collaborate or give a talk or come on a live stream or participate in something or help out in some way, I've really honed my skill set or built a system, a framework that I use every time I ask somebody for anything. Been wildly successful. The amount of not just willingness to participate and engage and help, but the wanting to do it again and again. Because at the end, that's what we want to do. We want to build lasting relationships. We don't just want to ask people for things and then walk away, which we'll talk a little bit about too in a minute. But all that to say is that's where my experience comes from. And why this talk is happening actually started with a tweet. Actually, technically, it started with a DM. Somebody DM'd me real quick, hey, how are you? Here's the job description. Would you mind either passing it around or passing on some names to me, people who might be interested? It seems innocuous enough, and it's somebody who I know, respects me, and so there's no ill intentions. But I had to be honest, I hadn't talked to him in a while, and it hit me quick, and it was out of left field, and there was more words in the actual job description. That was laid out crystal clear. I had all the context on what the role was. But there was more words in that than there was in asking me to do the thing or even just saying, hey. And sometimes we might do things, which I know that they did that in order to save time. They were trying to be respectful of my time. But the problem was they didn't understand what I valued. And we'll talk a little bit more on that. And it wasn't my time that I valued. It was actually having enough upfront information to make an informed decision, and then having them recognize that they're asking for it and showing appreciation if I chose to help them. I love to help people out, but at the same time, nobody wants to help others and then feel completely unappreciated for doing that helping. It takes a lot of effort, time. Recruitment is literally a career path that you can do. So, or talent acquisition, right? When we make these asks, even when they seem small, we always have to remember who's on the other side. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about really two things. We're going to be talking about the proper, or I take that back. Let's not use absolutes. We're talking about a structured way of asking for things so that we can teach it, repeat it, and if we were for work, report on it. But essentially, what we want to be able to do is have a system that we can rely on to get consistent results, to have a system to improve upon, because you can't get better at communicating and asking for things if you don't have some sort of base system to work off of. So the first part of this is actually rethinking the nature of relationships. So largely, when we think of asking for things, it falls into two buckets. It's either transactional or it's a relationship. This is often what we hear. And oftentimes, negative engagements are associated with transactional, and positive engagements are associated with relationship. I challenge the idea that transactional is necessarily negative and that relationship is necessarily positive. I don't think that's correct. I think the proof of that exists in the world, in that you might go get a tattoo, right? I've got plenty of those. I might go get a tattoo, and I'm going to sit down, get my artwork. Hopefully I love it, and I'm going to pay my tattoo artist what they have requested for that. Now that's a transaction, right? I've given them something of value, money, and they gave me of something value, artwork that I get to wear with me for the rest of my life. But it's still a transaction. Now, what's interesting enough is if I return to this tattoo artist for a couple more times, right? Now we start to say, this is a relationship, right? I might even start recommending my tattoo artist to other people. Oh, hey, I've got a great relationship with this tattoo artist. You should check them out. But if we roll it back to that first moment, there was no relationship. It was a transaction. I got a tattoo and they received money. So I've had so I always like to think of, like, why is the term transaction so poorly received? Like, why do we say, oh, don't be transactional, strive for relationships? And I think it's because when we don't really understand the nature of asking for things, we might do so in a manner where value is often realized entirely or largely on one side. And so what happens is, in situations where the value transfer is skewed in a transaction, it starts to get bucketed, right? I believe firmly that all relationships are inherently transactional, and what matters is the distribution of value. I see positive relationships as consistently ongoing transactions of varying sizes, either spoken or unspoken, where both parties are receiving value, where they feel like they received value from that transaction. That's a healthy relationship, whether that's with somebody you're a partner with or somebody who you're working with. And so I think we want to first, before we can have a system, understand that all relationships are inherently transactional, but it's more about what happens in those transactions that defines whether or not it's positive or negative. So moving on to that, what does this mean? In a transaction, where essentially somebody, it could be bi-directional. In the case of a tattoo, I'm asking for a tattoo and they're asking me for the money, right? In most situations where we want to collaborate with someone or something like that, it's not a commercial transaction. It's more of it can be commercial at times, but it's more of like a personal transaction. Anybody can go walk into that tattoo shop, and if they pay the money, they can get a tattoo. I'm talking about the type of transactions and relationships with folks who you want to build a more personal connection, who it's not their job to do the thing maybe that they're doing, or even if it is, you just still want to foster a good relationship with them so that when you ask, you're more likely to get positive results. And so the way that we do that is with the 3 R's. So the 3 R's of asking. The first one is recognition, all right? And honestly, it's the most crucial part of this. We're recognizing 2 things. The first is essentially that we're asking, right? Recognizing that we are asking for them to exert effort in some form or fashion to help us. Like we have a goal we're trying to achieve and we want them to help us. Let's let them know that we recognize we're asking them to do something for us and we don't think it's easy. We don't want to minimize their time, effort, or energy. But the second thing that we want to recognize is, why me? Why are you asking this person? What is it about them specifically that made you seek them out? This helps people understand I've put in the effort, like I've got this project, I'm very serious about it, or this thing, I need to get it done. I know you are the person because of X, Y, and Z. We've done two things now already with just this, just a couple lines of recognition. We have set the expectation that we understand we're asking them to do something that is going to be essentially work on their end and will be appreciative of it. And the second is that we took the time to make sure they were in fact the right person before we even ask them. We're not wasting time. Like you might ask someone to do a talk, but if they've literally said a bunch of times, oh, I don't like doing talks, I'm not a public speaker, I prefer written content and things, then you're showing that you have not put in the work to recognize that they don't even do that type of content. It's a pretty negative experience. So always be asking why them, right? Or they should be able to answer why me? Why did they ask me? That should be apparent from your first message. All right, so we've recognized, right? So that is one. What is next? The actual request. And so let me roll this back. We started from high, and I know it can feel like a lot to jump from high to a couple of paragraphs, but I would like to say that if we really want to respect people's time, then the best thing that we can do is provide them all of the context that we possibly can up front so that they can make as informed of a decision as possible with as minimal effort as possible. So we've got our recognition, and it may look something like, hey person, I'm working on an event. Actually, hey, let's use this. I'm working on an upcoming conference and I'm trying to fill some of the talk slots. Okay, so what we've done is we're setting the stage, a rough stage of what we're asking. Next, we get into recognition. I know that doing talks is a lot of work, and I've seen that you've done a couple this year, but I wanted to see if you would possibly be interested in speaking at this event on this date. So now we're starting to set the tone. So we know, one, they understand we actually dug in and figured out how roughly busy is this person, how many talks are they doing, are they even doing talks? You could talk about how they're in alignment for a particular topic. It's not unlike how I ended up talking to you today. It was a great example of a way to ask for things. And you want to lay out all of that information and then also let them know that you understand its work, but that we're not done there. That's just the second step. So then is the question, right? So we want to know if you'll be able to do this. How long is the talk? Is there a Q&A? What date is it? If roughly what time is it? You can show them, again, recognition, their time zone. Hey, I know you're in West Coast time zones in California. Happy to have you come on these slots, which shouldn't be too early or too late for you. And so we're building up to that request, right? And so we make our ask. And then as descriptive as possible as you can about the actual, and we'll get to the third part in a sec. But before I do, I just want to say this. Thanks in advance. Avoid preemptively thanking someone. It makes a lot of assumptions about what they're going to say and how they respond. And it actually puts them in a position where now they have to counter your thanks. If they didn't have the bandwidth or weren't interested in the engagement, you put them in an interesting situation. It can quickly turn a positive transaction into a negative one. Just adding that one line, thanks in advance, can throw it off, even if you put in all this work, because it makes the assumption that they're going to do it, right? And we can't do that. Next is the reward, right? So we want to make sure that we are letting them know what they will get. So we're back to the nature of relationships and the transfer of value between a transaction. What value will they get? What is the reward for them? If it's a talk, maybe it's monetary. Maybe it's you work for a company, has a large platform, and not only can we give you money, but we're going to try to promote your content on our blog, social media, whatever, for the next few months, right? Like you have to be creative, but also you have to know what they value. Because if you offer something that they don't value, then there is not an equal exchange. value has gone more to you than it has to them. And we want, honestly, to capture less value than we create in transactions as a general rule, because that means the person walks away feeling like they got a lot of value from it, even more than you did. So that's what we want. Show me the money. When in doubt, it's not always possible to know somebody well enough to know exactly what they value. Most people value money because we need it. When all else fails, money is always a great option. Now, this is a little something extra. I'm going to try to breeze through this a little bit. I know we're coming pretty close up on time, I believe, a couple more minutes. But I wanted to talk about something I've added in here, and it wasn't in the blog post I wrote about this either, which is really the 4 pillars of positive relationships. So whenever I'm on like a DevRel team or in DX or anything that's very socio-related, and honestly just how I try to treat relationships as a person, as a whole, I try to do it off these 4 pillars. And I find that I talked about the system to outline it. What I didn't give you is a lot of examples about what those messages might look like in practice. And that's because it's all very situational and hard to do. But if you use these 4 pillars and the 3 R's, I think you'll find that your requests will go a lot further. So the first one is be authentic. I don't know how important or how much I could stress this, but this one I would say is definitely the most important. You never want to misrepresent yourself or others, meaning you don't want people sending messages on your behalf, right? If it's saying it's coming from you. You don't want to use the likeness of other people without their permission. It means being transparent about why you're asking for things or what you will benefit from that situation if they decide to help you, so that they can understand the true value distribution. And so we have to be authentic. It's critical. And the second is get consent. It is never okay to use anyone's content, likeness, ideas, or even ask them for their help without first getting their consent. And so that's very important, right? It's to make sure that they're willing to help. The third, be empathetic. As I was saying before, we can't have an equal distribution of value if we don't know what people value. And we can't know what people value unless we're being empathetic. What goals is this person working towards? What current needs do they have? What things are they interested in? And you should know these things. If enough about someone that you want to ask them to help you with something, you should be willing to put in the extra effort to know enough about them to know what they would value from getting back from helping you. Ooh, that's a lot of words, but you get what I'm saying there. You got to know what they value to provide value, right? And then lastly, create more value than you capture. It's not always possible. It might be that you made some open source project, you're trying to get on a podcast, you want to talk about it a little bit and share it with some folks. And so you might reach out to the podcast person to get on there. Now, there's still ways you could possibly provide value, but it's probably not going to be more value than the value you get of having that large audience and getting your reach out there. That's okay, because we're still letting them know that we recognize what we're asking of them, and we recognize how valuable it would be to us to be on that, and how, so I think it still shows people that you care, you've put in the effort, and if it were in your capability to provide more value, you absolutely would. But again, be creative. Value can take on many forms. Maybe you're good at editing. You could help out edit a couple podcast episodes. Maybe somebody else who would make a good guest. The list goes on. But now I will say this, if you are asking on behalf of a company, I say this because I was a developer advocate for a long time and worked in DevRel for quite some time. If you are asking on behalf of a company, I'm going to find it extremely hard to believe that you are not capable of finding a way to create more value in that transaction than you capture from somebody. If you're asking someone to do a talk, they should be paid, right? You should promote their content on companies' platforms, things like that. And that is essentially the 4 pillars there. And if you keep these in mind when you're following the 3 R's, hopefully you'll get a lot better results from your asks. If nothing else, maybe it'll just help you have a little bit more positive engagement in relationships. But with that, go forth and ask respectfully. Thank you so much for joining me today, y'all. I had an absolute blast. I am excited to get into this Q&A and answer any questions. And yeah.